People are joining on Zoom as well as Facebook.
Seven attendees हैं अभी.
जी जी, Zoom की लिमिट तो इंशाल्लाह फुल ही जाएगी.
What's the limit of what's the Zoom limit?
Currently we have 100 on webinar.
Okay.
और जो अलग से कुछ लोग आएंगे वो इन एडिशन टू दैट है, जो पैनलिस्ट के तौर पे आएंगे. तो 100 एज अ पैनलिस्ट अलाउ करता है एंड 100 एज ऑडियंस. तो पैनलिस्ट पे तो हम लोग ही हैं, 7 पीपल राइट नाउ. Zoom ID 854 5180 3152.
नहीं आज बोल के नहीं ऑनलाइन होना. ओके.
जी, औज़ु बिल्लाहि मिनश शैतानिर रजीम, बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम. कुल हुवल्लाहु अहद, अल्लाहुस समद, लम यलिद वलम यूलद वलम यकुल लहू कुफुवन अहद. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome all of you for today's webinar on internal audit from a board of directors perspective. CFO Club मार्च से वेबिनार की सीरीज का आगाज कर चुका है. हम ऑलमोस्ट 40 वेबिनार्स कर चुके हैं अब तक, डिफरेंट टॉपिक्स पे, कॉर्पोरेट गवर्नेंस, हाउसिंग फाइनेंस, साइबर सप्लाई चेन एटसेट्रा. सो टुडे वी आर प्रेजेंटिंग ऑन इंटरनल ऑडिट. और आज अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह हमारे तमाम पैनलिस्ट और इंक्लूडिंग मॉडरेटर वो सब ऑडिट कमेटी पे सर्व कर चुके हैं. सो वी विल ट्राई टू बी मोर एंगेजिंग. तो ऑडियंस से रिक्वेस्ट है अपने क्वेश्चंस जो है वो Q&A में हमें भेजें. कोई सजेशन है, कोई चीजें हैं तो हम चैट के थ्रू बताएं. फेसबुक पे क्वेश्चन पूछने के लिए आप कमेंट का सेक्शन यूज कीजिए. लेट मी इंट्रोड्यूस जुनेद साहब. आज हमारे मॉडरेटर हैं जुनेद शेखा साहब. असद अली शाह साहब, ही इज president of Asad Ali Shah Associates. He has been managing director for Deloitte Yusuf Adil. और इसके अलावा वो बहुत सारे गवर्नमेंट के प्रोजेक्ट्स में हैं और साथ ही साथ वो प्रेसिडेंट भी रह चुके हैं आईकेप के. जफर सुभानी साहब हैं हमारे साथ. Again, a very well-known name. He's also ex-president of ICAP, and he's on different committees with the government, including privatization board. Mr. Ayaz Ahmed, who is very well known as a CFO and CTO for Habib Bank Limited. So currently he's doing some business in UK, as well as he's doing a great research on Islamic finance. तो इंशाल्लाह कभी मौका मिला तो इस्लामिक फाइनेंस पे भी उनसे हम बात करेंगे. तो कोई भी सवालात हो, कोई चीज़ें हो तो आप हमें Q&A में बताइए. फॉर्मेट ये है कि अभी हम स्टार्ट करेंगे एक पैनल डिस्कशन से, उसके बाद हम लाइव Q&A ओपन करेंगे पब्लिक क्वेश्चंस के लिए, और साथ ही साथ लास्ट में हमारा एक छोटा सा 8 मिनट का राउंड होगा विद रैपिड फायर. So I would like to welcome Junesh Shekhar sir. Junesh sir, over to you.
Thank you, Shazad, for the introduction and providing me this opportunity. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Respected and learned panelists, all those who are connected to us in this webinar, either from Pakistan or abroad, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, and a very good evening to all of you. Especially, I would like to thank the CFO Club and Shazad, who is the host of today's program, for taking this initiative on this important subject. And I would also like to thank all our participants from wherever they are attending for taking out time from their busy schedule and being part of this webinar. Let me quickly take you through the agenda first. I'll be giving a brief presentation or an overview of about the topic first, which will be followed by questions from the panelists. Basically, I'll be asking a few questions from the panelists. Then the floor would be open for the participants to ask any questions that they would want to ask from the participants. And I think it would be a good opportunity for the participants to address any issues or seek any clarifications, because we have got a panel of experts over here. So I think it would be a good opportunity to ask any questions. And then I would hand over the mic to Shazad, the host, who would actually do the rapid fire, and then we will move towards the conclusion of the session. And I think by the time we finish the session, it would almost be the dinner time in Pakistan. And with due apologies, because it's a webinar, we would not be serving any meal or high tea or snacks. So you'll have to take dinner at your own place. On a more serious note, I'll try to make this session as productive as possible, obviously with the engagement and participation of all of you. And I'll try to keep you engaged for the next 80, 85, 90 odd minutes. So please bear with us. Coming to the subject and setting the tone, let me kick off the discussion by saying a phrase, why internal audit? I mean, this is one of the sentence that normally comes up or pops up or comes on the discussion table whenever there's a talk of internal audit. Either it's about setting up a new internal audit function or beefing up the capacity of the existing internal audit functions. You know, this question actually always pops up, at least in my experience, whatever experience that I've got. And this is not the only question that comes up or pops up. There are also other questions as well related to the same punchline. Does internal audit adds any value? Why internal audit? Internal audit is good at nothing but pointing mistakes. How can they add value if they don't know what the business is about? Internal audit is a showstopper. Internal audit disturbs or slows down the decision-making process, and blah, blah, blah. There are lots of questions and the thoughts that actually comes up whenever there's a talk or discussion about the internal audit. Is this a myth, reality, or a perception? We'll try to find answers to these questions when we move to the next segment, that is a panel discussion. But on a more serious note, these are really serious questions that not only challenges the value creation or value addition by the internal audit function. Basically, the value addition comes at a later stage. These questions actually, or these thoughts actually, uh, basically challenges the core existence of internal audit function. So, I mean, if we are discussing these types of things, or if the perception about audit is such, and I'm sure there are valid reasons for these. So this actually makes all of us think why there is a need for internal audit function. And also, just to add, I mean, there's also a perception that audit is for big companies or profitable companies. So if a company is making loss, because audit is always considered to be a back office function, so it doesn't, people say, it doesn't make any sense for a company that is reporting losses to have more costs and to have an internal audit function. So this is, the general perception about the audit. But there's always another side of the story. There are two sides of the coin. So the blame can't be put on one party or one side. I mean, you can't blame the CEO, or you can't blame the local states, for example, for that matter, or you can't blame the chief internal auditor, or you can't singly blame the board audit committee or the board. I mean, all the stakeholders have to come together, and they unless and until they appreciate and they value the need of an internal audit function, there can't be an effective internal audit function. So there can be an audit function, but the audit function would not be that effective. So all the stakeholders have to come on board. And moving forward, how stakeholders would actually come on board. So I think first we also need to understand and we need to appreciate who the stakeholders are. And I think when we move on to the next segment of this session, that is a panel discussion, we would also discuss in detail who exactly are the stakeholders of the internal audit function, and what their stake is like on the internal audit function. But I think one thing which is important to understand is that gone are the days where audit was used to be about policing and finding mistakes. So I mean, we need to understand and appreciate, all of us, in particular the chief internal auditor and the audit function, that gone are the days that audit was about policing and finding mistakes and pointing out mistakes. The modern audit is now more about value addition and value creation. And that there should be in my view, there should be a concept of audit business partnering. We hear a lot about, I don't know whether it makes sense or not, because of that independence thing between the audit and the non-audit functions. But we get to hear a lot about HR business partnering, finance business partnering. I think we also need to initiate and understand and appreciate the concept, or introduce the concept of audit, internal audit, and business partnering. And this is one of the things on which I would want to pick up the brains of the panelists when we move forward. So I think internal audit in particular, and all the stakeholders in general, they need to shift gear and move with the time to initiate a modern internal audit function. Now, talking of the regulatory regime. What makes audit compulsory? So the regulatory regime in Pakistan is mainly governed by the existing law. Existing regime is governed by the Companies Act 2017. Sorry, Companies Act 2017. Previously, it was Companies Ordinance 1984. This is the holistic overall framework of governance of listed companies, or the entire scheme of companies in Pakistan. But a need was felt for a more focused approach towards governance, about nitty-gritties of the governance. So hence this document, Code of Corporate Governance for Listed Companies, was issued in the year 2002. And with the passage of time, with the experience, with the learnings of all the stakeholders, the revised versions were introduced, or were issued, of the Code of Corporate Governance. And the latest version was issued last year only, which is 2019. And this basically document actually not only enforces, that the listed companies ought to have an internal audit department, but it also discusses the entire schema of things like it. First of all, it enforces that there has to be a mandatory board audit committee. The code speaks about the two committees. It makes two committees mandatory, and one of the mandatory committees is the board audit committee. So I think we all need to appreciate that a board audit committee has a very big role to play in the overall governance of the organization. So I mean, a board, and then downside the then board audit committee and the internal audit department and the chief internal auditor, they all have to play a very important and significant role in the overall governance of any organization. And when we talk of governance, we actually talk of sustainability of any organization. The code also talks about who can be the member of the board audit committee, who can be the chairman of the audit committee, what would be the TOR of the audit committee would be like, who could be the chief internal auditor, hiring, firing of chief internal auditor, who could be the secretary of the board audit committee, etc., etc. And one thing that it also emphasizes the reporting metrics of the chief internal auditor, because one thing we have to remember is the independence of the chief internal auditor and the audit department in particular. Because unless and until they are independent, they would not be able to do their work in the best interest of the company. So the reporting matrix of the chief internal auditor is towards the board audit committee functioning. Administratively, he continues to report to the chief executive officer of the organization. So with this context and background, I would like to move towards the other segment, which is the panel discussion. But before we move on to the panel discussion, I would like to show a couple of slides just to lighten up the mood. Shazad, do I have the option of sharing the?
Yes, sir. Everyone can share.
Where is the option? I can't see that option right now.
सर नीचे शेयर स्क्रीन आपको नजर आ रहा होगा ना, शेयर स्क्रीन पे क्लिक करें और वो आप फाइल का पूछेगा, आप उसको फाइल बता दीजिए एंड जस्ट क्लिक शेयर.
Okay.
अगर कोई साउंड है तो साउंड पे भी क्लिक कर
No,
दीजिए.
there isn't any sound. So basically these are just few slides. So it's on a lighter note, and with all due respect to everyone. So let's start. So this is basically, this actually shows the objectives of internal audit. There's a difference between, or the gap between, the objectives of the internal audit and the objectives of the organization as a whole. And it also shows a lack of communication. So again, with all due respect, this is on the lighter side. You are sure you have conducted an internal audit before. So it basically challenges the capability of the internal auditor. I mean, I also spoke about that auditor also need to shift gears and change gears and move. They also need to move towards the modern times. They say it takes a thief to catch a thief. So it can have two meanings. If I have done mistakes before, I will able to point out the mistakes of others. Or the positive side would be, okay, if I have gone through the process, so I would then be able to add value to the processes. I believe the board has successfully achieved its goal of biodiversity. There's a lot of talk of diversity in the board, but there's hardly any talk of the competency of the board members. So I think this also needs to be taken into account. I mean, the more important, I'm not saying there shouldn't be any diversity. There should be diversity, but the more important is, I think the thing on the top should be the value addition that is coming from the board, and that can only happen if the board member is competent. Could you run those numbers by me once again, Chief? I was thinking of an old love, which shows actually, I mean, how attentive the board members are when they or while they are attending the board meeting. So this again, with all due respect, on the lighter side, I mean, they are more interested, the board members, on their own financial gains rather than the financial gains of the organization and shareholders as a whole. So this was it. Uh, how do I stop sharing the screen? Okay, fair enough. Okay. So I've got a set of questions. Are we all set to start off? The panelists, can we start?
Yeah, go ahead, Junaid.
Okay, thank you. Uh, I'll start for the sake of, I mean, just to avoid confusion, I'll be addressing the panelists by the first name because, you know, the Mr. and Saab always lead a confusion. I hope it's okay with three of you.
Sure.
So, okay. So, thank you. Ayaz, I'll start with you. How would you actually describe an internal audit function? I mean, if you were to sell internal audit to an organization, or if your views were sought whether to have an internal audit function or not, so how would you actually sell internal audit function to the main stakeholders?
I think in any organization, obviously there's the overall business objectives. And then you start looking and saying, what are the ways to achieve those objectives? And you start evaluating what are your needs to get into and to deliver those objectives. So first point is people need to they will all understand and they will all come together very nicely on what is it that we're trying to do. You showed some cartoons, and one I remember from almost 35 years ago. There's a board that was just fighting with each other. And the chairman says, now that we have decided that our core line of business is to make money, can we get on with it? So, well, basically, the objectives are the first thing. So you start with objectives and you say, what is the objective of the organization? What are we trying to do? Then you sit down and say, okay, what are the processes by which we will get there? And this is where it is not one thing. It is not either or. It is not whether you want something. You will end up with a whole set of complementary requirements. And the skill is to balance those, because obviously too much money, too much effort on one will be at the detriment of something else. So coming back to your specific question, I feel that the audit process, the audit is something that allows the organization to continue on its goal and address the risks that are stopping it getting there. And I know we add on those value adds, they come later, but the whole idea is that the objectives of the organization, everyone agrees what they are. And the main thing is that really, I mean, I've been on, I think, at least 15 to 20 boards, and most of them have been audit chair. And the secret is to get that atmosphere going where everybody accepts and desires that we have, we work together and say that we have common goals. So if anybody who is violating, who is going to cause risk to the organization, all the senior managers, everybody is in an atmosphere that they all feel that that is not something that we would like to see in amongst us. So what a feeling aati hai, right from the CEO down to the board members, to the shareholders, everybody feels that, look, we must be both compliant, we must be risk management, etc. वो सारी चीजें जब एक atmosphere बनता है. And that's the key task of the board, to get that atmosphere. Because the moment you start looking and thinking audit is a waste of time, waste of resources, stopping us, then you haven't got that atmosphere. And alhamdulillah, I must say that it's not a difficult task because of the first thing I said, which is we all have the same objective.
So just a counter question. You said that we have got same objectives. So in a state-run organization, I mean, I'm not sure what is a better word for this.
Mhm.
So are the objectives common for everyone, or the family-owned business? Sorry, I think family-owned
Mhm.
business is a more appropriate word. So are the objectives common, or are the objectives common only for one particular family?
Yeah. Okay. See, the point is that even a family-owned business has aspirations to grow, has aspirations to move into a domain where they're larger and they're bigger, they're making more money. So if you start with that objective, then yes, everyone has common objectives that this organization of ours should be one of the best in its field. It should be one of the most money making. And from that, we all prosper, including the directors, including the shareholders, including the internal auditor. So that's why I'm saying I think we do share objectives. It's just getting that highlighted properly and understood.
Hmm. Thank you.
Junaid, I would like to add what Ayaz
Okay.
says, that current trend of outsourcing and family-owned companies. The number of companies have hired the big fours for doing the internal audit, because they feel that in this way they can have confidence in the businesses, and it will help in the future growth also, and in other investment activities they do. So currently in Pakistan, they're not required, they're not a listed company, but still they feel that the size is growing, and for in order to go forward, they are still also hiring the internal auditor to ensure their thing there.
I think you should also market that they should also outsource to firms other than Big Four.
Unfortunately, the trend is still there that only big three, I can say, are already been hired for this.
Okay, thank you. Zafar Saab, a question from you. Uh, I touched upon that thing, the stakeholders of internal audit. Who are the stakeholders? I mean, okay, normally we think of only three stakeholders: internal audit department, CEO, and the board, and the vis-a-vis board audit committee. So are these the three, only the three stakeholders, or there are larger stakeholders? Because okay, when we go into some deep research, so HODs are also the stakeholders. Investors at large are also the stakeholders. Regulators at large are also the stakeholders. So how would you actually describe the stakeholders? Who exactly are the stakeholders, and why they are the stakeholders?
I think that the stakeholders, obviously, if we go 20 years back, they were only limited stakeholders. But as we go along, the number of stakeholders are increasing. I mean, I remember that the stakeholder like media and civil society, they was not there. But as we go along, as the business is becoming more and more complex, there are stakeholders that are added. In also the internal auditor also. I mean, there are lenders also, there are government people also. So the organization culture is known to everybody. So stakeholders is not only the board of directors, the CEO or other people. The stakeholders are increasing day by day, and they would like that there has to be a robust system in organization, whether it is outsourced, whether it is done internally, in order to ensure that whatever the system is there, financial statements reflect properly, and there is, like examples, take the procurement area is so huge area, and unfortunately, obviously, this is the very risky area. So all these things are now becoming important, and you have a robust system of internal audit. So stakeholders have increased, and the good organization where systems are there, then all the stakeholders, they are aware about it. They know the psyche of a company. They don't have to take much time. If any customer is there, if a supplier is there, they are aware about it. So with the system, they will be aware about this, and they will have more reliance on the company.
So is it because of the awareness, or because of I mean, what could be the reasons why there are more stakeholders?
Because obviously it is not like the sole proprietor partnership. It is basically the company with multiple stakeholders. There are borrowers also. In like power project, you start the project with at least 70% debt also. So stakeholders in all those things have increased. Basically the researchers are also there, so stakeholders have increased, and for that you need to have a robust system, and reliance is there.
Fair enough. Thank you, Asad. Question for you. How serious are the stakeholders? I mean, there is also a perception that audit function is taken as a checkbox activity. So how serious actually, we talked about audit, we talked about stakeholders. So the question from you is, how serious are the stakeholders in having an effective internal audit function?
Yeah, I think that's a very important question. First of all, thank you to Shazad for organizing this very important webinar on a very important subject. I think I'll go back to the previous question and come to this on the stakeholders. While Zafar rightly said the stakeholders are increasing, but there are some key stakeholders which drive the effectiveness of the internal audit and who are the key users. And that obviously remain basically the chief executive, the board, the audit committee, and of course the key shareholders were represented by the board, and maybe I think also the executive management. These are the key users and key stakeholders. And obviously, to your question, how serious? Now, that will vary from the company to company. And in fact, the effectiveness of the internal audit really depends on, again, not only the seriousness, but the capability and competence of the real stakeholders, which is really the board, the audit committee, the CEO. How do they see the role of the internal audit and how can they benefit from it? Actually, your slides were very interesting. Some of the key slides that you showed, which reflected on the quality of boards, not only in Pakistan, but worldwide. I would say that the company's performance, governance, and outcomes really depends on the quality of boards, because they are the people, who select the chief executive, who select the CEO, C-level people, and including the internal audit. And again, the quality of audit committee. So if your audit committee and the board, or in the case of private companies, the SAT or the CEO, the user of the internal audit, so how serious they are and how competent they are, the effectiveness of the internal audit will also depend, because they are the people who do the selection and hiring of the internal audit. They are the people who pay the internal auditor. They evaluate the internal auditor. So it all depends on them.
Okay.
And, generally talking about Pakistan, just to answer your question, I think my observation is that except for very few companies, which are well-governed companies in Pakistan, I think a significant number of companies, I think they lack seriousness as well as they lack the effectiveness and competence, really. And that is the reason why our outcomes of the corporate sector, whether it is public sector companies or the private sector companies, are really not optimal. So I think, the better governance you have, more effective and competent boards you have, and their commitment to the objectives of the company. And of course, because internal audit provides it's a critical pillar of the governance. In both internal and external auditors are agents of the directors. So directors obviously set their objectives, set their strategy, but then for evaluating the performance of the management and where the company is going, their main tool is really the internal audit as far as the operational objectives and internal objectives are concerned. Of course, external audit is a tool which provides assurance to the outsiders, largely the shareholders, lenders, and other stakeholders.
Thank you. Thank you for a detailed elaboration. Now, coming back to Ayaz once again. Ayaz, you had also worked abroad. I mean, you have worked for one of the largest bank or the largest bank in Pakistan. You had been on number of boards and number of audit committees. In fact, if I could correctly recall, you had been the largest serving chairman board audit committee of CDC. So I also had a privilege of reporting to you in that capacity of chief internal auditor. Blending the experience of both abroad and Pakistan. So what difference do you see in the role that audit committee plays abroad and the audit committee plays in Pakistan? So what are the roles? What is the difference in the role they play? And if there is a difference, what are the challenges?
Sure. I mean, I must be very honest and be say that I'm really pleased that the quality of manpower, the quality of the professionals in Pakistan are no different from anywhere in the world. So I honestly can say this, having experienced quite a few international assignments and operations. We're as qualified, as competent, and as serious about our job. Uh, the only difference we have is probably a style difference, and that's where sometimes I've in Pakistan always tried to get a nice relaxed atmosphere. So that concept of audit aa raha hai, audit kar raha hai, audit ho raha hai, you just got to try and again work with the CEO and create an atmosphere that really makes it easy for the auditor to do the job. And like I said very at the start, that if we can all agree that if everything is going well, and I must say that in 30 years that or 35 years that I have been in the profession, I've not really come across any internal audit having caught a fraud. But that doesn't mean that it's not effective. The fact that it exists, the fact that the processes are there, the fact that the processes are being constantly reviewed, that reduces the amount of frauds that you will catch. So the two should not be in any way related. And that's another challenge, for example, in mindset, that we shouldn't think that our success is catching things. In fact, the success is preventing things. And somehow those are the things that we come up. Now, for example, one of the that and once you make that atmosphere applied to the CEO, he also then can filter that down to the group heads. But look, we all want this company to do well. We all want people who are not following the rules to be pinpointed and taken to task in a different, I don't mean it in a bad way, but at least made responsible for any failings that are happening and correction that needs to be done. So answer to your question, I'm very satisfied with the quality of people in Pakistan, in the corporate sector generally, and they all are all sharing the same global objectives.
Okay, so I mean, when you talk of quality and practices, so you talk of both the board audit committee as well as the chief internal auditor and the audit department. So
well, I'm talking about the internal audit more than the board audit committee, because that's where really the quality of work really comes through from the audit department.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Coming to Zafar, tone at the top. I mean, we talk a lot of, especially in the multinational companies, we talk a lot of culture of the organization, and we say like it's basically the culture that brings in new talent, good talent. It's a culture that drives the company. It's a culture that innovates the company. Uh, do you see some connection of succeeding or having an effective audit function and the tone at the top and the culture of the company? So is it something that has to be blended within the culture? I mean, the audit function has to be blended within the culture of the company, or it has to be kept separate?
I think in any objective what you're achieving in organization, if the tone of the top is not there and they don't really want to achieve it, obviously the objectives are not achieved. I mean, being on the audit committee chairman of a few board, I've seen the difference is that in a few companies, where obviously sometimes the CEO is reluctant to obviously adopt the audit basically observation to implement it fully. Sometimes obviously the internal audit do also say something which obviously there are alternate available also. But if the tone is there and the top management, which includes CEO and other important people, if they have a very clear vision that they need to improve, they need to improve the processes, they want to mitigate those risks of frauds and weaknesses in the control, then obviously sometimes it is cumbersome. Sometimes you need to also change the basically some IT system also, which will take time. And if the tone is there, okay, fine. I mean, there is even a rare chance of this thing, but again, the probability is there. So tone is from the top management, especially CEO, is there in order to achieve the objective. Then the results are quite different. Even if they are ready, if there are things which obviously speaks negative about CEO performance in some area, and if they admit it and they say fine, I mean, this is the area where I could not take proper thing, and they agree, fine, they need to improve it, then organization improve. And the way things are changing, that there is so much volume of things, so much new technology is there, so you need to be abreast, and obviously the tone is to be there that yes, adopt those latest practices. And also I will say that the technology also is becoming very important. So these are so important things that you cannot take it easy for implementation. So your question is that tone is very important. When if you have a nana approach that nahi ye nahi karna, to kuch nahi hota hai. You need to agree and obviously assess any recommendation from internal auditor, whether it is outsource or in-source, and see that how it is practical, and what are the pros and cons, and what benefit organization will have.
Thank you. One additional question on this. I mean, ये आपने कहा ना कि नाना वाली जो approach होती है, because you know that no one actually likes their mistakes to be pointed out. So obviously, you know, internal audit is also in a way, I mean, in a way, it's, you know, pointing out mistakes, highlighting mistakes, value additions are a positive लेंगे तो value addition कहेंगे, negative लेंगे तो उसको pointing out mistakes कहेंगे. तो इस culture को कैसे tone at the top की हेल्प से ब्रेक होता है कल्चर, कैसे होता है वो कल्चर जो ब्रेक, अगर नाना का जो कल्चर होता है कुछ ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस में, तो वो कैसे
चेंज आ रहा है अभी. आई थिंक अब जो नई प्रॉप है आपकी सीईओस की, कंपैरेटिवली एक यंग है, डिफरेंट जमाने की पैदावार है, तो आई कैन सी दैट अब थोड़ा सी चेंज आया है. और ये नहीं है आपका कि जो है ना हर चीज को ना करने का है, तो चेंज तो आया है, बट अगेन डिपेंड टू पर्सन. बट जो कंपनी सक्सेसफुल होती हैं उनको अपनी चीजों को देखना है. दे डू वांट टू हैव अ लॉन्ग टर्म प्लान्स in order to ensure that the organization is robust. They have the proper capable person in different areas who can take the company to high. अगर वो पूरा सिस्टम अगर सही नहीं होती है और इंटरनल ऑडिटर्स को ओवरऑल व्यू नहीं करता, तो कंपनीज को प्रॉब्लम आती है ग्रोथ के अंदर. एंड देयर आर मेनी एग्जांपल्स जहां पे जो है ना बहुत फास्ट ग्रो कर गए, सिस्टम नहीं था आपका तो कोई बहुत बड़ा फ्रॉड निकल आया. बहुत सारे एग्जांपल्स लास्ट 5-6 साल के हर एक को पता है. तो वो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन जो है वो सफर करती है. एंड अगर ऑर्गेनाइजेशन को सस्टेनेबिलिटी है आपकी और लॉन्ग टर्म ऑब्जेक्टिव है, तो टोन ऑफ द टॉप चाहिए इसके अंदर, ताकि जो चीज सही है उसको इंप्लीमेंट करें.
ठीक है, थैंक यू. असद, मूविंग टुवर्ड्स असद. COVID obviously it's a big event, it's one of the century event. So if in my view COVID has three major impacts. If you look at the corporate, one is the technology, one is the risk management, and third is the crisis management. So what impact COVID would actually bring to the behavior or conduct or attitude at the board level, and in particular the board audit committee level, with particular reference to the risk management. So इसके बाद कोई change आप समझते हैं कोई आया है या आगे आना चाहिए?
I think obviously one thing is very clear, that there is move towards digitization because of the COVID, work from home and meetings on the Zoom, and more electronic communication. So that has happened effectively in most of the organizations, right? Now, how much internal auditor has his approach and his audit and communication has moved towards digitization, I'm sure it has, but to what extent, I think there's no assessment, and it is difficult to comment on that. So, in terms of risk management, also, I think good companies, I'm sure, have realized, the importance of risk management. And I'm sure good companies, and one or two companies that I am there, we have raised the bar for risk assessment, and also using internal audit as an advisor on risk identification and risk management, really. So it's only my perception that I'm sure it has also impacted, the company's overall culture, the boards, the audit committees, and the internal audit as well. So that's the answer. But I would like to go back to one or two previous items that you discussed. I think in terms of the quality that you asked a question, that what is the general quality of the internal audit, I would like to comment on it. I know I asked it, but I've remained in the profession as external auditor for nearly 35 years. PwC and then Deloitte, and obviously two major firms. And of course, I'm on the boards. My understanding is that I think the level of internal audit profession requires further improvement, significant improvement. Other professions also require, but I think this is a very strategic area which has been not optimally utilized in my judgment. I think the kind of value creation that the internal audit can has mostly, it is mostly being used only as an assurance function. And what I've seen is, and of course, I have seen hundreds of companies, hundreds of clients, both public sector, private sector, because, for the firms that I've worked, they had thousands of clients. So what I've seen is that mostly internal audit has been used traditionally to cover the operational risk. Even in good companies, what I've seen is that the internal audit generally is driven by the audit committee. An internal audit plan is annually approved by the audit committee. Then the internal auditor generally implements that audit plan in the best case scenario. Now, what is the issue that I see? The issue that I see is, I think both at the audit committee level and also at the management level and the internal audit, because it's a teamwork, I think the kind of flexibility that is required to manage the risk and to create value is much higher than what is expected. What I think should happen is that there should be more flexibility to the internal auditors in making some adjustments even to the plan approved by the audit committee, number one. Number two, the internal audit needs to play a more proactive role in engagement with the audit committee. What I've seen is that most of the ideas or the plan, some of it comes from the audit, but it's largely traditional. And then the audit committee adds its expectations. I have seen that the proactiveness of our internal auditors is perhaps less than what I expect. Their ability as a professional to guide the board and guide the audit committee, at least as per my expectation, it is lower. And that is also not only in Pakistan, but also globally. the survey that the Institute of Internal Auditors conducted, I think, a few years back, they found that the audit committee and the board members thought that the discussions of the audit matters, the internal auditors which were brought in by the internal auditors actually reduced from 54% to 45%. So what I'm saying is that the level of discussion that we have based on the inputs and insights which are generated by the internal auditor, I think are less than what is my expectation. I don't know whether that helps the discussion or not. What I'm saying is that just as there is an expectation gap with the external auditors, there is significant gap, at least for audit committees which stretch the performance criteria of the internal auditors. There is a significant gap.
I think Zafar wants
Junaid,
to
I
add
would like
something.
to add on Asad that again it all depends also on the chairman of audit committee. Asad, if audit committee chairman is obviously fully aware about what should we do, then obviously he can play a major role in ensuring that audit department outsource
Absolutely.
or in-house they obviously deliver. So that is also important because I feel their role is becoming more and more important in this complex world. And secondly, on COVID, I was just talking to a few people. Because of COVID, there was a relaxation of work in some area because obviously work from home and those things. And one or two places there were frauds also because people took the benefit and they got the benefit because the auditor did not carry out this thing because they in the initial part of the COVID in March, April. And then there were news that because of that position, there was some fraud also which auditors could not pick.
Yeah, I think just to add to what Zafar said, I think that's very critical. That was very much perhaps I missed out. I think the chairman of audit committee's role in managing the audit committee and enhancing the performance of the audit function is very, very critical. And I totally agree. A lot of it depends on, how much the audit committee chair is playing the role to, motivate the internal audit function, give them confidence, enhance their independence. I think that is very critical. And the other aspect, I think, again, I missed in the earlier discussion, you also asked, I think, that the perception about the internal auditor, they are obviously generally, as you said, they are not considered friendly, and they are avoided. That people think that they are coming to pick the faults, etc. So again, I think the role of the audit committee to coordinate that function is important. So part of the problem is addressed by the governance, the board, audit committee, and the CEO communications, that internal audit's role is important and they need to be encouraged, and they are friends, not foes. But at the same time, I think the other aspect which is very critical for the internal auditor itself is their stakeholder engagement and communication skills. So again, I think this is a big gap that I've seen. Again, globally also this is a gap, but I think in Pakistan, corporate sector generally, communication is really, really a big issue, and it is within different functions also. So I think especially for internal audit, to create alliances, to create a kind of teamwork, I think they need to continuously do the messaging that they are there to help and to achieve as Ayaz pointed out, actually internal auditor is a key component to achieve the objectives of the organization. It's a critical component, a critical pillar of governance. So internal auditor should be conceived as a help and, not an enemy. So part of his issue is communication. But obviously, there will also always be some tension and hostility because, after all, they do come and they do criticize also. So some of it is addressable, some of it will remain.
जुनेद, एक बात मैं ऐड कर लूं कि अगर आप सर्वे करें सैलरी स्ट्रक्चर का, सीएफओ का और ऑडिटर का, तो जमीन आसमान का फर्क है। आप उसको घास ही नहीं डालते हो तो वो काम उसको क्या करेगा, वो बहुत ज्यादा ये
सर जमीन कौन है, आसमान कौन है?
100 रुपए लेता है तो ऑडिटर 50 रुपए लेता है, तो उससे भी एक बहुत बड़ा परसेप्शन हो गया कि वो जो है ना खड्डे लाइन है।
नहीं, आई थिंक दूसरी चीज है, मैं ऐड करूं कम्युनिकेशन की। आई थिंक इट्स अ वेरी, बिकॉज यू नो आई हैव रिमेन चीफ इंटरनल ऑडिटर फॉर 3-4 years, so communication is the key. I mean, I think 50% of the work is communication for the internal auditor, and it's one of the subject on which least attention is paid. It's not only about, you know, getting reconciled with the auditees, but also how you communicate your findings in the reports. So I think it's the key, or
So
इस पे कोई attention.
This is a general problem of all accountants and auditors, you know. So yeah, I think this is a soft skills need significant improvement. अयाज की ज़्यादा बेहतर है because वो दूसरी साइड पे ज़्यादा रहा है, but I think yes, especially for auditors. हाँ, तो I think communication is very very critical. Otherwise, you can have excellent auditors, excellent even fraud examiners or detectors or preventers, but if they are not able to communicate about their work and sell their work, then I think all of that comes to a, you know, not a very good, it's not that productive.
Okay, Shahzad, please allow me to touch upon a very sensitive issue. I mean, can ICAP play an important role or some role in, I mean, developing internal audit as a profession? I mean, देखिए, एक तो internal audit as a profession है और एक governance है. Governance as a subject. I remember when syllabus was being changed at ICAP, you know, there was a general discussion called, and as Shah Saab, I was also there, Shah Saab also raised the subject matter that governance and internal audit as a profession is not being taken care of in the new syllabus. So it's an open question. Any one of you who wants to chip in? So can ICAP play, because, you know, I mean, what I feel is generally whenever you think of having a chief internal auditor, I mean 80-90% of the time you see a chartered accountant or a cost and management accounting fitting that role. But with technology coming in, तो ऐसा तो नहीं होगा कि पता चला IT के जो लोग हैं वो chief internal auditor बन गए बाद में. I mean, I'm not against IT or some other profession, but I mean, so
can I come in?
Yeah, please.
It can and it should. Simple answer is it can and it should, because a significant number of chartered accountants play this role. And of course, there are others, the IIA chapter and other professionals who are internal auditors, they should also. But I think all those who are interested in governance, they need to play a key role in uplifting this profession. It is in the interest of the corporate sector. It is in the interest of the country and our corporate culture, really, because I think improving the value creation role that you earlier probably talked about is very very critical. अच्छा, एक चीज मैं और बात कर लूं. आप रेगुलेटरी आपने बात की थी शुरू में. I think for the benefit of our participants, एक interesting development हुई है, as many of you know, कि corporate governance framework जो है 2019 में हमने change किया है. As you know, I am also on the SECP policy board, and I had some role. I initiated this. We have converted significant part of the corporate governance 2000, which are part of the company's ordinance. Now rules are coming out of that. We have made it comply or explain, except for certain mandatory provisions. So having an audit committee is mandatory. So other provisions like qualifications of the internal auditor and many others related to internal audit के उनकी वो सारी अब comply और explain है, mandatory नहीं है. इसका मतलब ये नहीं है कि internal audit के बगैर listed company चल सकती है. You have to have internal audit, लेकिन उसकी जो पहले qualifications की requirements थी, अगर आपके पास कुछ और हैं या मतलब ये है कि तो काफी flexibility हमने उसमें की है, so that because we thought कि दुनिया में मतलब ये है कि ये नहीं हो सकता कि यही rules जो हैं governance के होने चाहिए. we noted that nearly 87% of the world is on comply or explain. हम rule based चल रहे थे और उसके अलावा 5-6% जो है वो बिल्कुल ही voluntary codes हैं. It is only India and US where they have some mandatory provisions. Everything is rule based. So we have now substantially made it comply or explain. We want actually markets to lead the corporate governance, create demand for the corporate governance. So मतलब corporate governance rules में लिख देने से नहीं होती improve. ये तो पता है तभी improve होगी जब अच्छी कंपनियां जो अच्छी governance है उनके share price ज्यादा होंगे, वो ज्यादा valuable होगी. So that's the idea.
Junaid, if I can add to
your corporate governance Pakistan में आया ना तो बहुत
Zafar, wait. Zafar, wait. Ayaz wants to add something.
Sorry.
Zafar, just a quick one. On the team and the type of people who should be doing this job. Now, this is a very, very important subject. Now, while we do think that accountants are the best people for internal audit, actually each organization has its own skill set, its own processes, its own technology. तो ऑपरेशन से लोगों का आना, टेक्नोलॉजी से आना और एक मल्टीडिसिप्लिनरी टीम बनना is probably one of the best value adds that you can do. And wherever I've been, I've tried to make sure that people don't see it as an accountant's job because, that the external auditor is doing quite a lot of. But where value add can be done is by understanding the processes, and then the comments you give adds value because someone who has been in operations, when he comes and says, this is possible, the arguments are a lot less, the discussions are a lot less. And also, he has got some experience of some similar situations, so he's actually seen it in practice. The multidisciplinary team in internal audit is something that I really do think that we need to work towards.
मैं यही बात कर रहा था कि आई थिंक सिर्फ अकाउंटेंट्स को लेना CIA पोजीशन पे उससे बात इतनी बन नहीं रही है आपकी एंड एज एक्सटर्नल ऑडिटर्स तो अपना काम कर ही रहे हैं मल्टी डिसिप्लिनरी लोगों को इंडक्ट करें बट अभी तो एक 95% जो है वो चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट या ICMA इस पोजीशन में है बट इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग इज ऑर्गेनाइजेशन एज अ चेयरमैन ऑडिट कमिटी एज एन ऑडिट कमिटी मेंबर आई थिंक they need to ensure that what is good upon the organization also. Then again, it all depends कि organization किस किस्म की requirement क्या है आपकी. अगर technology driven अगर आपकी company है और आपका customer का बहुत ज़्यादा focus है, तो वहाँ FMCG की बात है. So I think we need to ensure that what proper mix is there, composition of the audit, internal auditor department, CIA and the team. I think that the chairman of audit committee and the committee members should contribute possible जो अभी इतना contribution नहीं आते generally जो है वो अभी improvement जरूर आया है last 5-6 years के अंदर but again they need to do more work to ensure that they play the fiduciary role properly.
I think that's a very important area and I think excellent comment by Zafar. I think the staff mix needs to be looked into nitty-gritty by the audit committee itself. Because I haven't seen any audit committee who actually looks into हाँ ये पूछ लेते हैं कि जिस तरह बोर्ड कोड में लिखा हुआ है staff है नहीं है adequate है नहीं लेकिन I think that really need to deep dive and look into what exactly the background of the staff is in terms of qualification and experience and what exactly the mix of the staff is. And this until we have
मैं as a audit committee chairman जिस कंपनी के अंदर आउटसोर्स नहीं इन हाउस है तो मैं एक रेगुलर उससे मीटिंग apart from the audit committee की मीटिंग at least in 45 days I do share exactly क्या कर रहे हो टेक्नोलॉजी क्या है वो जरूर मैं इंश्योर करता हूँ जो लिस्टेड कंपनीज की है to ensure that interaction with auditor not only in one day but before also is important.
Okay, thank you.
अच्छा उसके लिए जो तरीका है जो ऑडिट इंटरनेशनल स्टैंडर्ड्स ऑफ इंटरनल ऑडिटर्स IIA ने दिया हुआ है which again I think doesn't happen in many companies. एक तो ये है कि there should be an annual assessment of internal audit function by the board or the audit committee. There should be an annual assessment as you know of the board itself and the committees also. वो भी अभी पूरी तरीके से नहीं हो रही है पाकिस्तान में तो इंटरनल ऑडिट की इफेक्टिवनेस जिसमें आपका स्टाफ जो आपने बात की वो भी और आउटकम्स क्या आ रहे हैं वो सारे रिस्क कवर कर रहे हैं कि नहीं कर रहे हैं क्रिएटिविटी कितनी है कम्युनिकेशन स्किल्स कितनी है फॉलोअप कितना है ये सारी चीज़ें एनुअली अगर एक फॉर्मली असेसमेंट हो ना उसमें हो जाएगा, ये नहीं हो रहा. Second, there is a requirement of the IIA standards and a good practice that once in maybe 3 or 5 years, there should be an external assessment of the internal audit function. And the benchmark is the IIA standards. IIA standards दिए हुए हैं, उसके हिसाब से again it is done. Perhaps हमने कुछ बैंक्स के लिए किया था, या एक दो ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस कराती हैं आपकी, शायद आपने सीडीसी में शायद एक आध मरतबा कराया हो, या इस तरह की ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस कराती हैं. Very few do it, So these are the tools to enhance the effectiveness of the internal audit. And as we said, it largely depends on the board, the chairman of the audit committee, and the audit committee.
I think that's a very good idea.
अच्छा सजेशन है सर. I think important है आपकी evaluation, and then outside की एक जो है ना, अगर in-house है तो outside की जो है ना सर्वे जरूरी है.
हाँ, एक चीज मैं इसमें ऐड कर दूं. I was talking to someone who works and lives abroad. He was saying there's a concept developing abroad that they bring in an advisor to the audit committee, which actually bridges the gap between the internal audit, chief internal auditor, and the board audit committee. तो जो असद जो बात कर रहे थे उसी तरह की बात है. वो 6 महीने साल के लिए उसको ले आते हैं और वो पेपर्स रिव्यू करता है और बेस्ट प्रैक्टिसेस को इम्प्लीमेंट करता है. वो एक वैल्यू ऐड करता है आपके बार को रेस करने के लिए. तो आई थिंक I have not read anywhere, but someone was telling me that this concept is gaining popularity. Advisor to the audit committee. He's not a audit committee member, he's not a board member, but he basically bridges the gap between both of the stakeholders. So I think that's it from my side. I think Shahzad, we can open the floor for questions from the participant, and then once we are done with the questions, so just give me 2-3 minutes to conclude the session before I hand it over to you finally.
So there are a lot of questions. 4 के तो मैंने आंसर कर दिए थे टाइप करके, छोटे से क्वेश्चंस थे. कुछ क्वेश्चंस हैं, जैसे एक क्वेश्चन है, कल्चर ऑफ ऑर्गेनाइजेशन प्लेज अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट रोल इन encouraging value addition in the organization. Instances are there where management would not consider internal auditors value addition suggestions even though the recommendation does add value. Situation where management is not willing or not have willpower to transform the organization. So the question इनका ये है कि internal audit उसको कैसे इस situation को डील करें.
हाँ, इसको मैं आई थिंक हमने काफी डिस्कस कर लिया. मैं इसका आंसर इस तरह से थोड़ा बहुत ब्रीफली कर देता हूँ. आई थिंक एक जो बात जफर ने टच अपॉन की थी कि जो उसकी जो स्टेटस है, उसका ग्रेड है, उसकी सैलरी है, आई थिंक अगर उसको हम थोड़ा सा इक्वेट कर देंगे CFO के, तो आई थिंक ऑटोमेटिकली इशूज. आई मीन देखें ना, अगर मैं कोई बात कहता हूँ तो ज़ाहिर मेरी डेजिग्नेशन को भी लोग देखेंगे ना, कितना वेट देना है उस बात को. तो इफ आई एम एट पार विद at the top brass, so obviously whatever I say or whatever I write, whatever I point out would be taken up seriously. I was reading one of the books written by that former Jack Welch, former CEO of GE, and in one of the books he had mentioned about the people management perspective. तो उसने कहा था अगर किसी important meeting में CFO के साथ head of HR नहीं बैठा हुआ तो उसका मतलब you are not walking the talk. आप स्टाफ के बारे में सीरियस नहीं है आप. तो that head of HR should be at the same strategic level, and he should be sitting in the same level in the strategy meetings in which CFO of the company is sitting, which then shows you are serious about your staff. Please go ahead, Shahzad.
जी, एक सवाल है, और हम सब जानते हैं कि नॉर्मली जो चेयरमैन ऑडिट कमेटी होता है वो इंडिपेंडेंट डायरेक्टर होता है. सवाल इनका इंडिपेंडेंट डायरेक्टर की इंडिपेंडेंस के पे है कि जिसका इलेक्शन खुद मेजर शेयर होल्डर या स्पॉन्सर्स करते हैं. सो
मैं इसका सवाल का जवाब है कि ये बिल्कुल सही बात है कि जो इंडिपेंडेंट डायरेक्टर है तो मैनेजमेंट चाहती है कि हम इसको जो है ना इंडिपेंडेंट कहलाएं. एक इम्पोर्टेंट है कि इंडिपेंडेंट कहलाएं. अब बात ये कि देन इट ऑल डिपेंड ऑन दैट पर्सन कि ही हैज बीन अपॉइंटेड इन द बोर्ड एज एन इंडिपेंडेंट कहलाने का, लेकिन फिर वो टोपी अपनी इंडिपेंडेंट सही तरीके से पहने जो कि लगे इंडिपेंडेंट है. आई मीन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के अंदर डेफिनेटली जो इंडिपेंडेंट बनाते हैं जानने वालों को इस तरह करते हैं, बट अगेन अगर इफ यू हैव अ प्रॉपर पर्सन, इफ दे इवन यू हैव बीन सिलेक्टेड बाय some preference on that, but if you really want to play a role, और बहुत रोल है if you want to do effectively, because there are so many things. फाइन, आई मीन जान पहचान होती है, बट अगेन जो बंदा जो है चेयरमैन है या कमेटी का मेंबर है, he can play a great role as an independent, although his appointment is because of reference. So this is again from person to person, and again the organization को basically culture भी क्या है, and he has to work out to improve the culture so that he can play an effective role.
मैं इसका आपको जरा एक वाकया सुना देता हूँ, which will clarify the definition of internal audit. 2010
independent director or
में बहुत ही interesting है. I was on the IFAC board and also president of ICAP, I think उस वक्त था, and also I was used to be a chair a UN group, ISAR, which is the financial reporting group. So 2009 global financial crisis हुआ, तो एक IFAC ने, इंटरनेशनल फेडरेशन ऑफ अकाउंटेंट्स, और UNCTAD UN ने जेनीवा में एक कॉन्फ्रेंस कराई ऑन फाइनेंशियल क्राइसिस और कॉर्पोरेट गवर्नेंस. And there were two sessions. One of them I was chairing, and there was one, gentleman, a panelist or a speaker, Mr. David something, who was the chairman of the chairmans of the audit committee, association of the US. So he made his presentation on the audit committees and the role of the independent directors and all of that. And then there was a question answer session, and somebody asked him, Mr. David, can you define, what do you think is the definition of an independent director in the context of US? So he came up and he said, you want a frank answer? So obviously people said yes. He said, well, simple definition of an independent director in the context of US is that independent directors are the friends of the CEO. So वहाँ पर in the US, basically it is the executive CEOs, board members appoint करते हैं. In the context of Pakistan, there are two type of companies in Pakistan. All of them are controlled, either owned by state or family owned, or the public sector. So in the case of independent directors in Pakistan, they are friends of the state or the minister or the secretary, whoever is the appointing. Generally तो ये है. Within that context, कुछ ना कुछ वो independence देख लेते हैं. Otherwise, generally ये है, unfortunately. This is the reality. So obviously, if we have better criteria of appointing directors and really independent and expertise, तो ये काफी सारी चीजें change हो जाएंगी. ये problem है, worldwide है, Pakistan में भी है ये.
But on certain boards, I mean, for example, one of the things I keep pointing out to the board members, while you have been nominated or you have come through some selection criteria, but as of now, you are representing all stakeholders as the board of directors. You cannot have the hat of I represent somebody or I'm this. So there is a need to have teamwork within the board who actually understand that we are responsible to all the stakeholders once appointed. How they got here is obviously it's in the background, and as you mature, you all know कि हाँ ठीक है वो कहाँ से आया है, but you challenge each other.
Shahzad, I would also like to add, I think independent director and selection of independent director is a gray area and shall remain a gray area, I think, in the foreseeable future. But I think it's up to the person who is appointed as an independent director. Does he wants to add any value, or he wants to justify his position or not? And largely it also depends on the boss, or I would call him the boss, the state or the family owner or the family owned business. What exactly does he exactly wants, any value addition from the independent director or not? Because we need to appreciate that chairman or chairperson needs to actually appreciate that having a good internal audit function is in the interest of everyone. Unless and until he and all the stakeholders realize that the internal audit function is in the best interest of everyone, so we'll continue to have these type of taboos and disasters of calling the independent directors as a friend of the CEOs. Because this incident also happened with me. I did my director training program in the year 2013, and one of the presenter actually asked from us, the participants, okay, what is the definition of independent director? So reply was similar. Reply came. One person, actually a very senior person of the industry and profession, he raised his hand and he said, "I want to answer." And he said, definition of independent director is the friend of the CEO. So this is not only in USA, but it's also in Pakistan. So
Yeah. Yeah, इसके लिए there is one proposal, and I think that's a gap in our corporate governance code also. यहाँ पर independent director की definition तो दी हुई है, and of course, लेकिन usually one of the good global practices that the board is required to at least affirm and declare that जो independent directors हैं उन्होंने assess किया है कि ये वाकई independent है. ये हमारे यहाँ requirement होनी चाहिए, जो कि हमारे यहाँ मेरे ख्याल में missing है. Requirement बेशक comply और explain ही हो, लेकिन board at least assess तो करे कि independent है, जो independent directors वो कह रहे हैं वो independent है कि नहीं है. सिर्फ legal definition के हिसाब से वो कर देते हैं. Actually, do they apply their independent minds? And I think we need to sell this idea that an independent director, really independent, and of course he needs to be competent as well, an important stakeholder also, is actually in the interest of the company. The idea has been made mandatory, but it has not been sold properly to the corporate sector and to the entrepreneur.
सर, जो नॉमिनेशन कमेटी कुछ बोर्ड्स के ऊपर हैं आपके, उसके लिए ऑडिटर्स, इंडिपेंडेंट डायरेक्टर्स और डायरेक्टर्स के लिए उसकी फंक्शनिंग भी अभी तक का आई थिंक ओनली अ फ्यू कंपनीज हैव नॉमिनेशन, बट जो हैं भी तो मेरा ख्याल है कि कोई बहुत ज्यादा तोप नहीं चली है वहां पे, मेरा ख्याल है.
बिल्कुल सही है. एक तो ये है कि नॉमिनेशन कमेटी की रिक्वायरमेंट जो है होनी चाहिए एटलीस्ट फॉर लार्जर कंपनीज एंड पब्लिक इंटरेस्ट कंपनीज. वो भी मैंडेटरी नहीं है अभी तक. सिर्फ ऑडिट कमेटी और एचआर कमेटी शायद ये दो मैंडेटरी हैं. तो मेरे ख्याल में वो तो इन सर्टेन कंट्रीज नॉमिनेटिंग कमेटी इज आल्सो कॉल्ड गवर्नेंस कमेटी. तो कंपनीज व्हिच हैव लार्जर public interest, larger shareholders, larger stakes, at least उनके लिए मेरे ख्याल में हमारा ये ख्याल था कि कोर्ट को in second phase हम इसको दो हिस्सों में कर दें. एक तो generally because many of the companies actually which are listed are family owned entities. They got listed because of certain requirements, but with over 90%, 98% concentrated shareholdings, there are probably top only 50 or 60 companies or maybe even less who are actually have public interest. So for greater जो ज़्यादा capital raise करते हैं, जहाँ ज़्यादा capital stakes हैं, risks हैं, वहाँ पर मेरे ख्याल में enhanced requirements होनी चाहिए. Or some of these requirements, I think nominating committee is very important. That is one area, one requirement that which should be there.
अच्छा, one feedback after that, one question. वकार याकूब का feedback है, create a quarterly roundtables where the internal auditors can meet and share their experience and broaden the vision of internal audit. And he has recommended few names as well. And there is a question by Mr. Ashfaq Ali Khan. In some organization, it is felt that board of directors misconstrues the internal audit reports due to the preconceived notions about the management and blows things out of proportion and vice versa. Do you feel the same? And has there been any remedy for this?
बिल्कुल सही है. Absolutely, he is right. कुछ जगहों पे जो है there is no balance. And again, earlier what we talked about, the role of the audit committee and chairman of the audit committee to, and of course the internal audit itself, to communicate their role, because perception gap जो है ना, expectation gap, जैसे external auditors का हम कहते हैं बहुत ज़्यादा है. बहुत सारे लोग उनको समझते हैं fraud detector है, और फ्रॉड हो गया तो एक्सटर्नल ऑडिटर ने क्या किया. कुछ अभी ट्वीट्स भी चल रहे थे कि पाकिस्तान में चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट्स क्या करते हैं, इतनी सारी करप्शन है. तो इसी तरीके से I know many of the internal auditors बेचारे get fired, really for the right reasons कि जी ये fraud हो गया आपने क्यों नहीं बताया. So on that is one side. On the other side, जो internal auditors बहुत सारे बकवास करते रहते हैं और उनको चुप भी करा दिया जाता है कि यार ये क्या बहुत बोलता रहता है. और कई जगहों पे जो है ना वो I have also seen certain chairmen of the audit committee who are very proactive, who are advocating very stringent audits and compliance. Then there are others who are actually, on the other side and telling auditors, to mind their business, or, they are getting out of their proportion. So I think there has to be the right balance, and the role of the chairman of the audit committee and the audit committee itself is very, very crucial to optimize the role of the internal audit for achievement of the corporate objectives, of the company's objectives, really.
Okay, thank you. Shahzad, let me pick up a question from. So, Ayaz, it's a question for you. It's a question written by Syed Hashmi, and it says, please, should internal audit and risk management function be under one department, or they should be separated? So that's a long
that's
debate.
Fine. I think the point is that, as we started saying, the risks that are there are getting more and more specialized. So the fact that you can have more and more specialized areas, whether it's in IT audit, compliance, and so on and so forth. So it's just another example of in banks, particularly risk of the financial type and is very, very high. So इसके लिए एक special department बनता है which is focusing on that. So there's no reason to merge them. And like I said, compliance is another similar activity. So in organizations today, because of the specializations, there's no harm in having more and more departments who are focusing on certain areas.
Okay.
But there is another view also on this.
मेरा व्यू है अपना कि
जफर आप बात करें फिर मैं बताता हूं.
हाँ, आपने बहुत बड़ा कोटा ले लिया, सो आप चुप रहिए. अपना जुनैद, ये आई थिंक इवन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में एंटरप्राइज रिस्क मैनेजमेंट भी अब आउटसोर्स का कंसेप्ट पाकिस्तान में भी काफी हो गया है. देयर आर पीपल हु डूइंग ईआरएम, और इनफैक्ट फॉरेन कंट्रीज के अंदर जो स्पेशलाइज्ड कंपनीज हैं आउटसोर्स एक्टिविटी पूरी नहीं करते हैं. देयर लाइक आईटी है, ईआरएम है, एंड स्पेशलाइज्ड इंडस्ट्री का वो कंसेप्ट बढ़ता जा रहा है. एंड आई थिंक ये जो रिस्क का इज नॉट अ वेरी इजी सब्जेक्ट. इन हाउस के अंदर बाज दफा जो है वो रिस्क की जो बनाती मैनेजमेंट है वो इतनी कंप्रिहेंसिव नहीं होती. एंड फॉर दिस आई फील दैट there has to be outsourced agencies who are effective and they can do it. That should be done. That you should also cover. But generally, just for audit committee है, उसके TOR में risk भी होता है, and risk को evaluate once in a year करते जरूर है. But I think to be more effective, outsource के एक दो organizations पाकिस्तान में हैं, तो उनसे हमें जरूर करवाना चाहिए risk का. Over to you, Asad. Sorry.
Just to, I totally agree. जैसे अयाज ने बोला कि बैंक्स में तो रिस्क मैनेजमेंट फंक्शन जो है ना वो सेपरेट है, इंटरनल ऑडिट सेपरेट है. वहाँ तो एक रिस्क की कमेटी भी अलग होती है ना. So in the case of bank, because you're dealing with the outsiders, deposit holders, funds होते हैं, वहाँ risk warehouse है, तो वहाँ तो होता है. इसी तरीके से I think complex organizations, very large organizations, usually you'll have a risk board risk committee also, and a risk management function also separately, which coordinates the does the ERM, enterprise risk management, etc. But in most companies which are not that complex and not that big, usually ये काम इंटरनल ऑडिट को ही दिया जाता है. तो जैसे जफर कह रहे थे, इंटरनल ऑडिट के ही रोल में रिस्क का भी, रिस्क असेसर तो वो होता ही है, वो कोऑर्डिनेशन ही कर रहा होता है, क्योंकि बेसिक रिस्क मैनेजमेंट जो है वो तो लाइन मैनेजमेंट कर रही होती है ना, एग्जीक्यूटिव कर रही होती है. ये कोऑर्डिनेशन का रोल होता है जस्ट टू इंश्योर कि कोई सिग्निफिकेंट रिस्क आर बीइंग कंसीडर्ड एंड दे आर बीइंग कंपाइल्ड एंड नथिंग इज बीइंग मिस्ड आउट. जो आपने कोविड में भी कहा, ऐसा तो नहीं है, नोन एंड अननोन रिस्क जो है ना वो प्रॉपर्ली एड्रेस हो रही हैं. सो इट्स अ स्पेशलाइज्ड फंक्शन. आइडियली it should be separate, but then it's a matter of cost effectiveness. कि आपको जाहिर है जितनी आप कमेटीज बढ़ाते जाएंगे आपको नंबर ऑफ बोर्ड्स भी चाहिए उसकी कॉस्ट भी आएगी तो आई थिंक साइज कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी एंड द पब्लिक इंटरेस्ट these three things will drive whether they should be a specialized risk management function. Otherwise, it should be, combined with the internal audit is a good area where, it is combined in the case of majority of the relatively smaller and medium-sized companies.
I think just to complement and supplement to what Ayaz and Asad said, I think बहुत ज़्यादा आप departments कर लेते हैं तो फिर responsibility भी फिर वो shared हो जाती है, फिर ownership भी कोई नहीं लेता उसके, ये भी एक risk होता है इसका. और I think coming back to what Zafar said, I think outsourcing can be a good option to overall lift the standards of internal audit, I think, and the governance. I think it can be a good model, engaging specialists not for the entire area but for certain areas, maybe.
Absolutely, ये तो बहुत ही जरूरी है because otherwise nobody can have that quality of skill all the time available in house. वो तो whether it's IT audit या environmental audit है बहुत सी ऐसे sections बनते जा रहे हैं which are so specialized that as an organization you'll never either need to have them all there full time. तो इस लिहाज से I think the outsourcing model definitely be used a lot.
Co-sourcing, I think it's called co-sourcing. Shazad, can we now cut it off now?
और भी हैं मैं आप लोगों को अलग से भिजवा देता हूं तो एक प्रेस रिलीज डाल देते हैं उसपे तो जुनेद साहब उसको कंक्लूड कर लें फिर एक छोटा सा रैपिड फायर राउंड करते हैं
ठीक है जी चले थैंक यू वेरी मच जस्ट टू कंक्लूड I think in my view I would conclude in a one sentence that internal audit activity should be about building bridges rather than burning bridges. And by this, what I mean to say is that the goals of the audit and the audit committee should be aligned with the goals and objectives of the organization as a whole. I mean, it can't happen, it can't succeed if auditor, as they normally do, they start working in a silos. I mean, they are aloof with what the organization is thinking or in which direction the organization is moving towards. So I think it's best in the interest of everyone that goals should be aligned. And I also mentioned the concept of internal audit and business partnering. So I think the goals should be aligned. And it can't be done alone by any single person or by any single function. So all stakeholders have to come on board. They have to come on the same page, whether it may be the investor, whether it may be the family who are the investors, whether it may be the board, independent director, chief internal auditor. So everyone has to come on the same page. Everyone has to be on the same direction. And I think one thing that we all need to appreciate is or understand is that an effective internal audit function is in the best interest of everyone. So unless and until we buy that argument, we would not be able to provide an enabling environment to the internal audit function. I think internal audit function needs enabling environment to perform its duties and functions in a more smooth and efficient way. And another thing that actually, a couple of things actually, because I'm summing up, I think Zafar mentioned about the pay scales of the internal auditor. I think that as an organization, as a management, as a board audit committee, that also needs to be looked into. Quality of audit, quality of the contribution by the board audit committee, how they look into the risk, which I think the other participants also touched upon. And I think there could be a concept of, evaluating the functioning of the audit as a whole and the board audit committee through an external third party. So that can also, kind of help in benchmarking and also uplifting the quality of this function. So thank you very much. Thank you all the participants for your precious time.
Junaid, sorry मैं interrupt कर रहा हूँ. एक दो क्रिटिकल चीजें रह गई हैं जो कि मेरे ख्याल में जरूरी है आजकल इंटरनल ऑडिट में मैसेजिंग करनी. आई थिंक वी डिडंट टॉक अबाउट डिजिटल ऑडिटर. You know, in digitization, this is the digital age. तो मेरे ख्याल में ये भी एक बड़ा जरूरी है. वी कुडंट टॉक मच, टाइम बड़ा लिमिटेड था, लेकिन आई थिंक यूजिंग एक्सपोनेंशियल टेक्नोलॉजी, डिजिटल टूल्स एंड डेटा, वो बड़ा क्रिटिकल है. एंड आई थिंक आवर इंटरनल ऑडिटर्स नीड टू बी अहेड इन टेक्नोलॉजी, अदरवाइज दे विल मिस द बोर्ड. दूसरी आपने जो बात की, आई थिंक वी डिडंट डिस्कस दैट, वो बहुत ही जरूरी है. मेरे ख्याल में पाकिस्तान में इंटरनल ऑडिट एज अ प्रोफेशन, शहजाद ने बात की कि आईकैप का रोल क्या है. तो आईआईए के चैप्टर्स वगैरह होते थे. मुझे लगता है कि कुछ कोऑर्डिनेशन और एज अ कम्युनिटी इंटरनल ऑडिटर्स की जो होनी चाहिए ना, जो फॉरम रोबस्टनेस जो है ना, वो कोई somebody needs to initiate that. मे बी शहजाद कर ले या आईआईए चैप्टर वाले हैं. वो मुझे लगता है कि somehow कुछ मिस हो गया है, because you need a community to work together, share your thoughts and pick up ideas. वो कुछ मेरे ख्याल में जैसे चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट्स की है, सीएफओज का आपने बना दिया है, तो मेरे ख्याल में इंटरनल ऑडिटर्स का वो जो है ना, वो होना जरूरी है. कुछ सर्वेज हों कि क्या हो रहा है क्या नहीं हो रहा. तो ये दो थॉट्स आई
चैप्टर
थॉट
था पहले, लेकिन आई डोंट थिंक सो कि अभी शायद इतना एक्टिव है, मेरा ख्याल है शायद, माय नॉलेज.
वही मैं हाईलाइट कर रहा हूँ कि ये गैप है काफी प्रोफेशन में पाकिस्तान में, ये होने की बहुत जरूरत है.
अच्छा, ठीक है. Just to add with what Asad said, and for the benefit of our listeners, that we are also planning two other programs, and one would be on governance and internal audit in family-owned businesses, and the other would be on internal audit in digital era. So these are in the pipeline. So we will be announcing the date as soon as we finalize the speakers and everything, content and everything. So thank you once again. It was a wonderful experience interacting with three very learned professionals as a panelist. Thank you to the participant. Thank you to CFO Club and Shazad.
प्रोग्राम अभी बाकी है सर.
It's my from my side is done. So now it's over to you.
जी, थैंक यू वेरी मच. थैंक यू जुनैद साहब. अच्छा, रैपिड फायर की मजेदार बात यह है कि मॉडरेटर इज आल्सो पार्ट ऑफ द रैपिड फायर एंड यू हैव टू रिस्पॉन्ड एज वेल. तो कुछ क्विक क्वेश्चंस हैं, और रैपिड फायर के दो एक्सपेक्ट हैं. यू हैव टू बी रैपिड, 5 सेकंड में आपने आंसर देना है, एंड फायर यू हैव टू इग्नाइट सम फायर. इट मींस कि द रिस्पांस शुड बी वेरी इंटरेस्टिंग. अच्छा, ऑडियंस भी उसमें पार्टिसिपेट करती है थ्रू चैट फीचर एंड कमेंट्स ऑन फेसबुक. तो जो ऑडियंस के कमेंट्स हैं रैपिड फायर के हवाले से, वो हमें चैट में कमेंट्स में बताइए. So my first question is, what is the future of job market in internal audit? जी जफर साहब.
जॉब मार्केट इंप्रूव होगी फ्यूचर में.
असद अली शाह साहब.
यार, एक तो पहली बात ये है कि मैं ना रैपिड हूँ ना मेरे में फायर रही है अभी. I think yes, I think for I would say कि overall देखो जॉब मार्केट कॉर्पोरेट सेक्टर में स्लो है, तो वो इंटरनल ऑडिट को भी इम्पैक्ट कर रही है. But keeping in view the importance of internal audit, I think there will always be a market for good auditors.
अच्छा, एक चीज मैं बता दूं, एक सरप्राइज गिफ्ट मिलेगा आपको इफ यू आर विनर ऑफ द रैपिड फायर. हम ऑडियंस से पूछेंगे हु इज द विनर. सो हमें पता है कि आप रैपिड भी हैं और फायरी भी हैं. जी अयाज साहब.
जी, definitely. The variety of people that will get jobs is what I was mentioning.
जुनैद साहब.
I see the market growing for the auditors.
Business or compliance, which one is the priority? Zafar साहब.
Compliance is increasing day by day of complexity, but I think दोनों का मिक्स होना चाहिए. Compliance ओनली काम नहीं आती, बिजनेस को उसके साथ मर्जर करना चाहिए.
असद साहब.
The compliance is part of the business, today you can't do business, good business, at least big vision, without compliance. It's an integral part of business.
Zabardast. Ayaz sahab.
Definitely, compliance has got to be an integral part of your business.
Junaid sahab.
Yes, compliance is a part of business, but whenever there's a choice between business and compliance, obviously we are going to choose business. This is what normally happens.
Achha, for internal audits, which is more necessary, digital audit tools या digital mindset? Zafar sir.
I think mindset is digital mindset. ये tools वोल्स तो ठीक है, but digital mindset is also important. And the digital mindset होगा तो you can deliver better.
Asad Ali Shah sir.
Yeah, Zafar is right. I can't add anything on that. It's all about mindset. Tools भी उसी से आएंगे. अगर आपके पास tools हैं, mindset नहीं है, तो tools को कोई use ही नहीं कर सकेंगे आप.
सही.
फायदा कुछ नहीं है tools का यार.
Just, I mean, mindset is, forgetting digital part of it, everything is a mindset.
Junaid sir.
Both. First mindset, and then obviously to complement the mindset, tools.
अच्छा, ये interesting question है. How should we break bad news to the board? जी जफर साहब.
I think bad news का तरीका भी है कि उसको पॉजिटिव वे में बोलो. जिस तरह होते हैं ना कि स्वीट शुगर टॉकन करें, तो चीजें आपने स्टार्ट नहीं करनी नेगेटिव से. आपने अगर ऑडिट कमेटी के चेयरमैन हो और बोर्ड को बताना है, तो आपको इसके बारे में होना चाहिए कि आप इसके पॉजिटिव एंगल को लेके आप इसको कम्युनिकेट करो. I mean, this is always a way how to deliver this thing.
असद अली शाह साहब.
I think communication is an art, but I think frank communication is very important, and one should have courage to communicate bad news as well, because without courage you can't do anything. कुछ भी नहीं कर सकते आप. So you should have the courage to communicate.
And you've got to find the right sequencing कि आपने किसको पहले बताया, depending on who it affects most.
Really depend how bad the news is. I mean.
Okay. Audience, how should we break bad news? Audience sir. Ji, last question. How do you rate Pakistan's internal audit framework and regulations as compared with peer countries like India है, Sri Lanka है, Bangladesh है? आप इसको 1 to 5 के स्केल पे बता सकते हैं. हमारा
पाकिस्तान जो है वो पाकिस्तान अकाउंटिंग स्टैंडर्ड्स और उसके इम्प्लीमेंटेशन में हमेशा से रीजनल कंट्रीज में आगे रहा है. और अभी भी मेरा अपना व्यू है कि ऑल्दो गैप जो है वो काफी कम हो गया है, वरना 20 साल पहले जब वीवर इन ऑडिट प्रोफेशन में इसमें थे, आपके आईकैप में थे, हम बहुत ज्यादा आगे थे, बट 2 गैप कम हो गए. बट अभी पाकिस्तानी जो है वो प्रोफेशन है, इट इज अहेड ऑफ अदर रीजनल कंट्रीज.
जबरदस्त. जी असद अली शाह साहब.
I think our internal audit regulation is part of the corporate governance framework. I think we did some improvement in 2019, but I think further significant improvement is required because corporate governance पे overall काम नहीं हुआ होगा. वो demand based and comply or explain, but I think good thoughts and ideas need to be inducted in our corporate governance framework. And more important than the regulations and framework is how to make it demand-based, how to promote and sell corporate governance to the stakeholders so that the governance improves.
Yes, sir.
And the demand is the key, but also I think having some sessions and discussions that actually highlight these matters are the way forward. I think थोड़ी सी जैसे ये presentations हैं, but also in each course, in each university level से ही start करना
पड़ेगा.
I think we rate at a higher level as compared to the peer countries, but obviously there is always a room for the improvement. And we discussed.
अच्छा, इसमें थोड़ा सा मैं sorry आप complete कर लें. एक चीज मैं बता दूं आपको शहजाद. I am trying to promote an idea of corporate governance council. You see, अभी तक क्या हो रहा है corporate governance में कि SECP, the regulator has been trying to enforce. इस तरह से corporate governance नहीं होती. हमने उसको comply और explain तो कर दिया है. ज़्यादातर दुनिया में corporate governance को promote जो है ना वो stock exchanges करती हैं और regulator उनको support करता है. I think our frontline regulator has to become more active. But what I'm proposing is that PSX, Institute of Chartered Accountants of Pakistan, Institute of Corporate Governance, maybe other institutes, and more important, actually the institutions, जो investors के जो forums होते हैं ना, like mutual funds. पूरी दुनिया में जो corporate governance है, वो institutions develop करते हैं. Independent directors भी वहाँ से आते हैं, composition भी वहाँ से improve होती है. We have to develop an ecosystem of good corporate governance, which will take care of good audit, good internal audit, and other good corporate governance practices. And for that, I'm lobbying and trying to persuade, people, stakeholders, कि भाई एक corporate governance council बनाएं so that there is a stake and led by PSX. And of course, उसमें innovation is the key. We just don't have to. Unfortunately, हम copy करने के बहुत आदी हो गए हैं ना कि हमने साउथ अफ्रीका का कुछ उठा के इधर कॉपी कर दिया, कहीं इंग्लैंड का कर दिया. We have to apply our mind and also do some innovation. ये क्यों हम समझते हैं कि पाकिस्तान खुद कभी कोई क्रिएटिविटी नहीं कर सकता, हमें कॉपी करनी है. So I think this is what we have to do some thinking also. I know thinking is the most difficult thing in the world. Somebody said that it is easier to die than think. I think we need to do some thinking.
100% agree with you, sir. हमारी जरूरत हो जब भी हाजिर हैं, और वो इंटरनल ऑडिट पे भी कुछ करते हैं इंशाल्लाह. जुनैद साहब, वो जो 2 वेबिनार आप कह रहे हैं, उससे पहले एक इंटरनल ऑडिट राउंड टेबल कर लेते हैं. Just think about it. Thank you very much. I'm done with the rapid fire. Thank you all panelists. I thoroughly enjoyed the session. Audience can tell us their feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Any comment? Any last comment from anyone?
आपने गिफ्ट का कहा था.
जी, ऑडियंस से मुझे रिक्वेस्ट है, आप हमें बताइए who is the winner of the rapid fire round. मेरे हिसाब से तो असद साहब काफी फायरी थे. वो हालांकि वो क्या कहते हैं, वो जो असर नफसी से काम ले रहे थे.
मिली पार्टी लग रही है, तो मिली भगत लग रही है.
ये फेयर नहीं है आपका शहजाद, ये फेयर नहीं है कि अभी आपने जो है ना बता दिया कि असद को
नहीं, मैंने वो फायरी का बताया. मैंने सिर्फ बताया कि
नहीं, आपने हिंट दे दिया. आपने लोगों को हिंट दिया. दिस इज नॉट फेयर असद, ये प्रोटेस्ट है.
इंडिपेंडेंस ऑफ
most rapid answers were from Zafar Saab and Ayaz Saab. Most rapid answers. So now decide. The audience can decide fire part and the rapid part, and then they can decide. Just let me know.
तुम्हें कहेंगे तुम selector हो गए हो तुम.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the participants as well.
बहुत शुक्रिया. Zafar Saab.
Okay.
Thank you. Hafiz.